Welcome into another episode, the second edition of FCS Rundown with Criswell and the coach. I'm Josh Criswell, joined as always by my co-host, the coach, Gene Clemens. And, you know, Coach, it's a little bit of a wild time in the FCS landscape. Final 2 weekends of the regular season winding down, and we're closing in on the postseason and still kind of a lot up in the air. You know, we're going to dive into it here right off the bat. Got a little bit of news earlier in the afternoon, recording this Wednesday evening, but looks like the MEAC isn't going to get that auto bid after all. So it is going to be just 10 auto bids plus the 6 at-larges, which, you know, brings me to my question to you. Who are you looking at right now as teams to watch in the race for those final at-large spots?
Well, I think you have to look. Obviously, you got to look in the Valley, North Dakota, who was sitting atop and now, you know, is not going to have that tiebreaker versus North Dakota State, because North Dakota State, you know, beat them, and the team that they lost to has 2 losses. So North Dakota State putting themselves in position to get the automatic bid. North Dakota probably gets an opportunity in. South Dakota State, do they sneak in? So then that becomes the question. Does South Dakota State get an opportunity to go in? I also think when you look over at VMI, their first loss of the season, they still have an opportunity to win? But if it's, you know, VMI, if they don't win the conference, do they get an opportunity to slide in as a number two team? And then if you look over at Delaware, James Madison, you know, that whole conference is so crazy because James Madison's games just keep getting canceled, you know, or postponed, excuse me. We don't know what Richmond really is. So Richmond's a team that I think could possibly in a regular year be a third team that comes out of there. We're just not going to know. UC Davis is a team that's played well this year, but they suffered their second loss. And now it is a question, will they get 2 teams? Will they get 3 teams out of that conference? So those are some of the teams that I think we'll be looking at probably in the next couple of weeks and see what happens.
Yeah, you know, and 2 more teams too. A little bit of more news this afternoon is Southeastern Louisiana and Southern Illinois have added a non-conference game. So that's another interesting one to watch. You know, Southern Illinois obviously had the big blowout win over NDSU early in the season, but, you know, suffered a couple losses. Southeastern Louisiana, you know, with 2 losses on their resume, but both of those to ranked Southland teams. So that kind of makes you wonder, you know, did these teams kind of see a little bit, maybe a glimmer of hope that they might be able to fight their way in with a big win there? But, you know, I think the teams that it impacts the most, you know, you mentioned VMI, they're in a little bit of a unique situation because even though they lose the head-to-head to Eastern Tennessee State, they don't have, because they'll end up with more wins if they win out, they'll end up snagging that auto bid. So I think, you know, this probably helps out Eastern Tennessee State more than anybody, because if they went out, how do you, you know, say this team that lost its first game, won 5 straight to close out the season and beat the conference champion, how do you leave them sitting at home while putting in, you know, say 4 teams or so from the Missouri Valley? Absolutely.
I think, though, we got to remember VMI have a rivalry game coming up, and even though Citadel hasn't been great this year, they've lost a lot of games, but they've been competitive in a lot of games, and you know they'll be up for that VMI matchup. A tough route this week for East Tennessee State. Excuse me. Yeah. So it's a tough week for East Tennessee State. Mercer's a good team, and they're going to give East Tennessee State all they want. I'll also look over and teams like Jackson State, you know, with just that one loss, to Austin P. Murray State sitting over there with 1 loss. There's a few teams over there that I think have an opportunity.
And Austin P's an interesting one too, because they've beat both Jacksonville State and Murray State. And, you know, even though they're a 2-loss team, all of a sudden you're saying, you know, are they deserving? Because, hey, they probably have the 2 best wins in that conference at this point in time.
Well, Jacksonville State has the best win because Jacksonville State beat Florida International, and that's a
true,
you know,
very true.
That's an FBS team. But as far as in conference wins. Definitely Austin Peay has the 2 best wins. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. There are a lot of conferences that believe they probably deserve 2 and 3 bids that may only end up getting 1. So
yeah.
It'll be interesting to see what happens.
The CAA is interesting too, because you mentioned Richmond, a team that hadn't lost a game but also hasn't really been tested so far this year. All of a sudden, they're a team that they might be a little bit worried seeing Villanova, 1-loss team. But, that loss, I think it came to Rhode Island, I think, if I'm not mistaken, early on. But it was a ranked loss. And then all of a sudden, they have that game against Delaware, who could be looking like, number 5, number 6 in the country by the time that rolls around. So all of a sudden, if you're Richmond, maybe you're not, feeling so confident as far as that getting in one of those last 2 at-large seeds.
Yeah, like we said last week, would not want to be the selection committee this year. Because how much weight are we putting into a ranked team or winning over a ranked team this year when really the ranks are, I think they're good. It's not like the rankings are, look, we know that team's great. We know this team has proven. It's more like we think they're good. Like we think James Madison's good, but they've only had 1 impressive win all season. So how good are they really? We don't know, but we have to bank on what we saw from them last year and hope that that's probably an accurate prediction for them as they go forward.
You talk about kind of trying to gauge where teams are at. One team we've probably seen as much, if not more than anybody so far this spring, has been Jackson State. They started off really strong, got a lot of hype. Obviously with Deion Sanders coming in, that's natural, but also had a couple of wins early, beat Grambling, and then also had that big win against beat Mississippi Valley State, I think by close to 40 or so. Had a little bit of a setback as of late, including a 20-point loss to Southern. But, me and you were talking about it off the air a little bit. If I'm looking at games that I'm betting on this weekend, I like Alabama State. I like them to cover that 3.5 points against Jackson State. I know we haven't seen much from not Alabama State, Alabama A&M. But, Alabama A&M taking on Jackson State. I like Alabama A&M in that one. Really strong performance against South Carolina State earlier this season in their only game that I remember them playing this spring. So as we've kind of seen, it kind of seems like Team Super Bowl whenever either they go to Jackson or whenever Deion and Jackson State comes to town. So I think they'll be up for this one. But you brought up a really interesting point, off the air that, they've definitely taken their lumps this spring, but they're setting the table for something really special, in the next season or 2 to come.
Absolutely. I think they're set up for success beyond just the spring season because they have a lot of guys who've been sitting on their, in their locker rooms, watching all of these HBCUs look at them as food. They want to beat Deion. They don't necessarily respect Jackson State. They just don't want the hype to be around Deion. It's actually kind of foolhardy because it's brought more hype to the HBCUs than HBCUs have had in God knows how long. They want to beat him so bad, and they're doing things, but these players are the ones that are remembering it. And so now you look at the quarterback position. Come fall, there will be a competition of 2, maybe even 3 quarterbacks. Wide receivers hella deep, and they have one of the best wide receiver coaches in the nation. Defense, they have cornerbacks and safeties all over the place. They're getting Deion Sanders' son, who wasn't a bad safety over in South Carolina. He's coming in. He's going to be able to play. And then you add that with all of the talented freshman class that they brought in. So they have transfers that are sitting and early enrollees that are learning and playing with this team right now. But they also have people coming in the fall that are going to make this team much better. And I think the SWAC will be in a lot of trouble in the next year or 2, especially if they're going to be joined by a Florida A&M who may be coming over to the SWAC as well, with a lot of the teams in the MEAC starting to make decisions about what they want to do with their future.
You brought up something up that kind of got me thinking. Obviously Deion's brought unprecedented attention to these HBCU schools throughout the spring. What I'm kind of curious to see, though, is outside of Jackson State, outside of Deion, who's able to really kind of capitalize on this momentum, because we don't know how long Deion's going to be there. If we're being honest, we'd love to see him stay there for a decade and turn Jackson State into a power. I think that would be a great story, but I also don't, necessarily think there's anything stopping him if Florida State opens up a couple years down the road, from jumping on to maybe greener pastures over there. I'm just really interested to see, this next year or two or however long, they have this golden opportunity for attention, which schools and, which conferences are really able to capitalize.
Absolutely. I think that you definitely have to look at the Florida schools, because they still have on their side, location. Even though Florida A&M is in Tallahassee, which is a small type of place, or small town field place, they're right next to Florida State. That's an environment that people want to be around. And then Bethune-Cookman University is on the beach. I mean, they're right there in Daytona Beach. So when you say location, those two teams have it. I think they'll be able to sell sexy the way that Deion's able to sell flashy at Jackson State. And I think that's what you'll see. It'll be interesting to see if the other teams are able to, kind of draw off of that attention, say, hey, you get a chance to beat Deion, the Alabama States and the Alabama A&M, because if Jackson State's able to start taking some of that UAB talent, taking maybe that lower level Auburn, fringe Alabama talent, if Jackson State becomes the place where Auburn and Alabama guys who haven't been able to break the starting lineup in 2-3 years end up transferring to, it's going to be scary for HBCUs.
No doubt. Well, let's spin it forward to the gambling portion of the podcast. I know that Coach Gene Clemens, you give your picks every single week on The Athletic, do a great job with that. And me, myself, hosted the Bet the FCS podcast. So we've got this FCS gambling science down to a T, or at least we thought before we told people to hammer that Sam Houston.
We were horrible last week. We were horrible. If you took our parlays last week, we apologize. How about that?
Nowhere to go but up from here, though. I guess I'll start it off with me keeping it in the Southland, and also keeping it with the consistent theme of always take the over in the Southland Conference, at least most of the time. And I'm going with that over. Nichols, Southeastern Louisiana. That one right now, I think I'd set it 70.5 points, depending on where you're looking at it. And there's just so much that I love about the over on that game right there. I mean, first off, you look at the quarterbacks in it. Lindsey Scott for Nichols, Cole Kelly for Southeastern Louisiana, a couple of former SEC transfers there, and also, arguably two of the best senior quarterbacks from a talent perspective in the entire FCS. Then you add on top of that the fact that neither of these two defenses has looked anything close to elite. And then also factor in, just on Nichols' side of things, their past 3 games, they're averaging a 94 point total. So, that covers you comfortably there. And they're going up against, a team that likes to air it out. We saw Sam Houston and Southeastern Louisiana light it up for like 80-something points earlier this year, it seemed like. So, for me, I always feel pretty comfortable taking the over in a Southland Conference game. And you can just go ahead and double or maybe even triple that whenever Nichols is in the mix.
Absolutely, I agree. It's one of the picks on my parlay, so stay tuned for that. Woo. For me though, I went with a little bit more of a difficult game, but one I think that is probably going to go the way of the favorite in this, and that's Kennesaw State traveling to Monmouth. It's a big game because neither team can afford to lose this game. This is a one bid conference. So they're not going to get another, the conference just hasn't been as good this year to warrant 2 people getting into conference. I believe Monmouth and Kennesaw State are the only 2 teams with a win in conference. Both are 2-0 in conference. So they're going to need to win this game. Here's the thing. Monmouth is a balanced offense. Kennesaw State, heavy run. But Kennesaw State has an offense that travels very well. And they have the luxury of not only not 2, but 3 quarterbacks that can get it done. They did this a few years ago in 2016 where they were shuffling quarterbacks in and out, and they just broke the old adage of if you don't have one quarterback, if you have more than one quarterback, you don't have one. Well, this is the triple, ladies and gentlemen. So if one quarterback goes down, you need somebody to be able to step in and continue on. This is why those types of offenses recruit 1, 2, maybe even 3 quarterbacks every single year to run that offense. I just think that it's so much easier for Kennesaw State's defense, which is good, to prepare for Monmouth because they see Monmouth-like teams every week. Meanwhile, Monmouth, they're not going to see any team that plays like Kennesaw State. And it's just impossible to not only game plan for the options of that triple, but it's impossible to game plan for that speed. Like the tempo and the efficiency that they run that triple at, I could see Kennesaw State getting up 14 early and just Monmouth can't run them down. And so a 6.5-point spread doesn't seem like something that's too far-fetched for me to take, even though it's on the road, especially considering that I think that Kennesaw State's a lot more battle-tested than Monmouth is.
Yeah, you bring up some great points that Monmouth, not near as battle-tested as Kennesaw is at this point in time. The only thing I might counter with that is that Kennesaw, I think, coming up on their 5th game of the season, whereas Monmouth only 3, makes you wonder, a lot of these times, especially, with some of these teams, we don't find out about injuries until the game's already started. So, you just don't really know what to expect. Does Monmouth get the edge from being more rested up, even though Kennesaw is more tested? I think for me, that's why I'm staying away from the spread in this one. But I really like the under that's set at 52.5. Monmouth, obviously, through 2 games, averaging over 40 points a game, whereas Kennesaw, keeping opponents close to 10 a game this season. Going to be, push comes to shove there, but I like this. Monmouth a balanced offense, but they do utilize the run a little bit more. And as up-tempo as Kennesaw State goes, anytime you're running a triple option, it's always a dangerous game whenever it comes to betting overs, much less overs that surpass 50 points. So I'm right there with you. I like your analysis on it. I'm staying away from that game, from the spread for personal reasons. But, if you feel confident, you take the spread, I'll take the under, and maybe we'll go 2 for 2 on this one.
Absolutely.
Awesome. We got our producer, David Graff, with us right now.
What's up, David?
He's going to run down our rapid fire picks for us.
All right, it's time for some rapid fire picks this week. You guys did pretty well, all things considered, last week. We've got 6 games on the slate here in our pared down slate. So let's just start it off rapid fire. Kennesaw State is -4.5 at Monmouth.
Yeah, and again, if you can find it at -4.5, I think it went up to -6.5 pretty quickly. If I still like Kennesaw State -6.5, I just think they're going to be able to wear Monmouth down.
I like Monmouth on the other side in that one, and I think they're just going to be a little bit more rested up. And as I mentioned earlier, though, for me, I'm staying away from the spread. I'm putting my money on that 52.5 point under. Sorry.
Absolutely.
All right, our next game, Idaho State at Weber State. Weber State is a 9-point favorite in Ogden.
Weber State's been Jekyll and Hyde all year. You thought you would think that they would get it together. I think this could be a place Idaho State probably feeling themselves after last week. This is a great place for them to have a letdown. I'm going to go with Weber State to cover that 9.
Yeah, give me Weber State as well. It's kind of like Weber State seems like they're married to these single-digit games under a touchdown. But I think this is finally the week they break through. And they really need it. I mean, we're talking about playoff seeding. They need to go out there and show us that they're a true national title contender. I think they finally give us a glimpse of that this weekend.
Never put your money on Tyler Vanderwall. That's a smart lesson. Youngstown State +3 at Missouri State.
Ooh, Youngstown State's been pretty bad this year. Missouri State is interesting. I think Missouri State has the better talent. I think that they've played at least a little bit more consistently. I'll go with Missouri State, and I'll give up the 3.
Another game that I'm not really in love with, but I think I'm going to go with Missouri State. This is another game where I think, the under is only set think around 41 points or so, but I'm not expecting a lot of points in this one. And, for that reason exactly, I think I'm going to go with Missouri State. I think it's going to be a close game, and I think they cover the spread in this one.
A little in-state action. Delaware is minus 26 at Delaware State.
To me, this was one of those lines where I was just like, gosh, 26, right? Out of nowhere. But then you think it's a rivalry game. They're at Delaware State. Delaware State's going to be hyped up. They've been playing decently, but I think Delaware is trying to prove a point. They're going to need to score and score a lot. They won't have a lot of marquee wins, so they're going to have to bank on just bludgeoning people. And so I think that they're going to get up on Delaware State and really put their foot on the gas. So I'll give the 26 reluctantly on the road versus Delaware State.
Yeah, Delaware State, just haven't really seen enough action of them to really get a full gauge of where that team's at. Delaware, on the other hand, they've been blowing teams away. I mean, their closest game was a 2-touchdown win that could have been even worse against a ranked Rhode Island team. And then I also look at it, they picked up wins, I think, over Maine and Stony Brook, who I would say they're probably roughly kind of in the same ballpark as far as a talent perspective as Delaware State. And Delaware won both of those games by 37 and 28 points. I mean, Delaware's shown that they can put up points. They've also shown that they can stop opponents, only giving up 8 points a game, number 3 in the country. So I like Delaware to go out and just kind of keep padding the stats as they try to prove that they're a top 4 seed this spring.
Wouldn't be a bad game to take a solo over on as well. I like the solo over for Delaware on that as well.
Not at all.
Fresh off ruining VMI's undefeated season against the spread, Eastern Tennessee State is minus 3 at Mercer.
Eastern Tennessee State can't afford a letdown. Mercer's a good team. They can beat them. But Eastern Tennessee, they can see the finish line. They're going to have to play. They'll know the urgency. I think that they're going to make it and they get it done. I think it's probably going to be a 7, maybe even a 10-point win.
Yeah, give me Eastern Tennessee State with the minus 3. I might even be looking, as you mentioned, see if I can find some alternate spreads to get some better odds. I'd take them all the way up to 6.5, maybe a touchdown. I think Eastern Tennessee State, I mean, they're one of the hottest teams in the country. I think they're going to go out there and not only pick up the win, but I think they'll beat Mercer enough to get some people thinking, is the SoCon going to do the unthinkable of all leagues and get that second team into the postseason?
Our final quick pick of the week, Northwestern State at Incarnate Word. Incarnate Word is a 10.5-point favorite.
Absolutely. And I think for me, Northwestern State plays the type of defense versus good offenses that holds good offenses down. I like the under in this game, and if I like the under in this game, that means that I like Northwestern State to cover. So I'll take the 10.5 on the road versus Incarnate Word.
I'm right there with you. I like Northwestern State, maybe even at that 9.5 range. Again, maybe check some alternate spreads, but at 10.5, I love that. Get you the touchdown and the field goal. I mean, this Northwestern State team, they might not have a win on their resume, but they've played Nichols, Southeastern Louisiana, and Sam Houston, the 3 ranked teams they played this year, played all of them within a touchdown. I mean, it's kind of crazy that your 2 worst games of the season came against McNeese and Lamar, kind of at the bottom of the barrel in the Southland Conference. But, this is another one of those teams, Incarnate Word, fighting to keep its playoff hopes alive, really. They need to win out to get into the postseason. That starts against Northwestern State. And I think the Demons, it might be time to play spoiler. Love the potential of, a money line pick, as I'll get into here in a little bit. But, yeah, give me Northwestern State 10.5 all day long.
All right, you guys don't have many disagreements this week. Weber State minus 9, Missouri State minus 3, Delaware minus 26, Eastern Tennessee State minus 3, plus 10.5 for Northwestern State. And then the one game that you guys do disagree upon, Coach likes Kennesaw State minus 4.5, all the way up to a touchdown. And Josh wants the points with Monmouth.
Absolutely. And when I'm right next week, just send my flowers. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Appreciate it as always, David Graff. Now moving ahead, time to close out the weekend with, I think you have to say, my favorite segment of the show every week, and that's our parlay of the weekend. You know, I feel confident, as you mentioned earlier in the show, Gene. Not a great week for the people who followed our advice on the parlays, but it's time to turn that around. Tell me who you're going with.
Well, for me, this will be familiar for you. This is an all Southland parlay. I'm going to take your pick of Nichols and Southeast Louisiana to go over 70 as one of my picks. The other one that I like a lot, which I believe is an overcorrection, and even though they may be without a few people, Sam Houston State and McNeese State over 59. That's another one that I think has a great opportunity to hit. Sam Houston will be chomping at the bit to have a better showing than they had last week when the offense was just disjointed and they threw a billion interceptions. I don't think they're going to throw a million interceptions, which means they're going to score more points. It's just that simple to me. I'll take that over 59. And then my last one, Northwestern State versus Incarnate Word. Northwestern State's played people really tough this year, especially some of the better teams in the Southland. And I think that Incarnate Word, their defense is going to be able to hold Incarnate Word in check, and their offense isn't that great. So when you have a not great offense, but one that can control the ball, and then a defense that's opportunistic, but holds teams underneath their point totals, I think that's a great opportunity for an under. So I'll take Northwestern State Incarnate Word under 67.
Interesting. I'm going to take a little bit of that Northwestern State Incarnate Word game, but I'm going to go Northwestern State to cover the 10 points there. I'm not sure how much I like it below that, but something else to keep an eye on, you know, as we've talked about, Northwestern State, a team that's shown up really strong against the toughest teams on its schedule, it seems like, and then kind of struggled a little bit elsewhere in the games that it should have handled. So I think this is a good chance for them to go pick up, you know, their first win of the season. So maybe keep an eye on what kind of money line odds you can get. I mean, if you can get Northwestern State somewhere around, you know, plus 250 to 300, I might have to jump on that. But, you know, to start off my parlay of the weekend, I'm going Northwestern State plus 10. Then after that, you know, a game that you talked about a little bit, your lock of the weekend being that Kennesaw State over Monmouth. I'm going with the under, as I mentioned, 52.5 on that. And then sending it over to the Ohio Valley to close it out, I'm going to be riding on Austin Peay to bring it on home, minus 13.5 against Eastern Illinois, an Austin Peay team that's fighting and clinging for any chance at a playoff berth. Probably going to need a few things to go in their favor still, but I expect them to come out and handle Eastern Illinois by at least 2 touchdowns. So, you know, that's what I've got for my parlay of the weekend. Gene, any final thoughts before we send it off for our listeners?
Well, you know, just one thing to remember is they need the Austin Peay of Jackson State, the Jackson State Austin Peay to show up. They don't need that other Austin Peay to show up. I think one thing to really look for this week, if you're looking for an entertaining game, Eastern Washington, who I think they have the player of the year there, my number one quarterback. Check out that article on The Athletic of my top 5, quarterbacks that are going to decide the FCS championship. Playing against an Idaho team that will be looking to get back on. They need a big win. They're desperate for a big win. That should be a good game. I'm looking forward to that game.
No doubt. You know, Eric Berrier, that Eastern Washington quarterback, he's a guy, you know, even if he doesn't pick up that Walter Payton Award, I'm excited to see how far he can take the Eagles in the postseason. That's what we got for you guys this week. I'm Josh Criswell. He's the coach. Gene Clemens. You've been listening to FCS Rundown with Criswell and the coach. You can find us on Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast. We've got you covered. We'll talk to you next time.
5-star rating. Let's go. 5 stars.